Supreme questions that you were talking about that the leaders in Somalia are not asking. So that's one part of my question. And if it's not tribalism, then what is that deeper explanation of what's going on? I kind of can't relate, maybe I missed that, but I was interested.
Yeah, well, it's a two kind of a pronged question. One is the deeper, what are the deeper questions? There are some. And then the other part of the question, as I understood it, is the phenomena of tribalism. Let me start with tribalism. What do you study here at Carleton? I assume you are a student here.
Sociology and anthropology.
Good. Well, for those of you in African studies, I mean, there is a long tradition of African studies, academic African studies, in the United States and in the world. It's over 50 years, the association. But in the literature, the concept of tribalism has been under discussion for a long time. And there are two schools of thought. I won't get into a lecture on this, but two schools of thought. One is the one that makes the premise and therefore works on that premise in a variety of field work and other ways of doing this. That tribalism is part of the organic defining features of African societies. Somali societies, therefore. I mean, in fact, the oldest school of thought in Somali studies is exactly that. Pioneered by two Europeans. One of them British, the other one Italian. The Italian is dead, Ciroli, Enrico Ciroli. The British fellow is still alive. He's 82 years old. His name is I.M. Lewis, long time at the London School of Economics. And his argument has been from the beginning. Dissertation at Oxford University, I think in the early, mid-50s, I think, or late 50s. That the Somali people have always been clanistic, organized in clan groups, so hostile to each other. They have always been like that, warlike, zero-sum game, heavy duty on this limited identity. And nothing has changed in the modern era as we speak, except they now have access to weapons. Okay? So they become just more lethal in the way they deal with each other. That's the basic premise. And then there are others in African studies and Somali studies who have argued, I must say, I would argue I was one of the first people, maybe even the first person to make the counter-argument in my dissertation, and argue that, in fact, clanism, tribal identities, are a secondary phenomena, that underneath there really are a struggle over issues of justice, as you correctly said, justice, and resources, really resources, resources. And in fact, kinship relationships that all societies have. I mean, if you walk up and down in the state of Minnesota, you'll be amazed at how many people, when you ask them, you tell them, well, tell me who you are, and they'll tell you they are from this town or that town, and you push them a little further and they say, oh yeah, we're Norwegian. I'm from Norwegian family or Swedish family or German family, particularly Norwegian and Swedish. So kinship relationships are part of human primordial relationships. That exists. But clanism is the politicization of kinship. Yeah, when you put it in the context of a struggle over resources and power. Okay? So it is not the identity itself, it is what the way identity gets twisted so that one can get access to what one then thinks is one's own interest. In this case, power and economic resources and these things of that kind. And you can see that in the Somali society. So that's the issue of tribal politics. I'm not suggesting that it doesn't exist. What I am suggesting is a veneer. And underneath that's a struggle over power and resources. And the more acute those resources are, the greater the contest for this. Marx says this. Adam Smith says this. Both of them, and they come from different schools of thought. So the Somali case, therefore, I think, highlights the anxiety that comes over highly diminished resources and degraded resources And then people call on these kinds of claims on each other to push for whatever little privilege that they might be able to win at that given time. I mean, you can even sense right here in the United States on the issue of race. Because the issue of race in many ways is deeply ingrained in the struggle of economic privilege. I mean, what was slavery except a regime of labor? That's what it was. But let me get to quickly to the questions. Well, question number one grows out of the answer I just gave you, and that is the great questions of economic impoverishment of the Somali people. Over 80% of the Somali youth of your age are unemployed. They have no jobs. They have no place to go. Over 80%. Where do you find among the Somali political elite, including the transitional federal government, where the arguments are made all the time to explain that cruel economic reality that confronts the Somali youth? Where is it? I have yet to read and see the president of Somali transitional federal government or prime ministers make that as a central issue and then organize the international system in a way in which that can be understood and addressed. Okay? So the economic questions, I think, are critical ones. Yeah. Second important question. Is this the death of what I call the telos, the death of collective civic identity? Yeah? Nobody's speaking about that. Hardly anybody speaks. And the best people you would think would speak about this would be those who are seasoned in Islamic traditions and in the faith. You would think that they will be the most people who are best suited for this. And some do. But many of them are really not talking about that. In fact, some of them talk about that almost to deny Somali national identity and to speak about being either Arabs, yeah, or just Muslims. And I tell the Somali people, we were Africans before we were Muslims. We were Africans before we became Muslims. You say that to a Somali crowd, and you will be amazed how much hostility you can get to that, because they don't understand that. They don't even understand the trajectory of history, which came first. And then the final point I want to make is this. Big question. Well, really 2 points. One is the fragmentation question. I met the other day somebody who was a minister in the last government. The government under Formaggio. Yeah? A 9-month government. I asked him, he's a minister, senior minister. He's left. And I asked him and I said to him, in the 9 months that you were a member of the cabinet, and this is a question I have asked others too, was there any time, any moment, in which the departure of a significant part of the country, Somaliland, cutting away, was ever discussed? And he said to me, not one single day. We never had a discussion about Somaliland. Here is one of the 2 regions of the country. Italian Somaliland, British Somaliland come together to create the union. The rest of the other territories, this is retail politics at the big level. And one of them says, by now, we're getting out of this. And there is no discussion within the leadership of the transitional federal government. No discussion at all. That's a deep question, because if Somaliland goes and they get that international recognition, it is over for the Somali Republic as we have known it. It's over. Here's the final question. Leadership question. The Somali people, as far as I can tell, maybe you can help me on this, I don't see any place where the Somali people are really asking the central question about quality of leadership, what kind of leadership, yeah, what criteria. I don't see that. I don't know whether you want to add something to this.
Yeah, and
Okay, good.
And no, I think Professor Samatar covered most of it, but I just wanted to add it in a very simple response to what people are now looking for in general. I mean, I don't know if there are some people that are discussing out there what kind of leadership are we looking for, But in essence, the ones that people respond to, and the 9-month government that Professor Samatar talked about is a good example of that. Some people that can put their personal and clan motives, can transcend personal and the clan motives. Those are the quality of people that they're looking for. And in action, these group of people have done that. They put something in place that people responded to. And if they lasted long enough, probably we would have taken a different direction of history, which is something that we can discuss another time. But that's all I would add to. And I agree with Professor Samatar on the issue of Somaliland not being discussed. Again, these are some of the priorities that one would wish that it would be on the top of the list. I, for one.
They've chosen to work on is the most pressing, and there's some disagreement over what is the most important or the root cause that has to be addressed first. So how do you negotiate those disagreements?
Very good point. Well, right now, just to give you an example, the priority in Somalia was in security, number one. Number two, the humanitarian issue. Now, from the human side, the moral side, one would say, humanitarian before security. But if you don't have security, you cannot even deliver the services that you want to deliver. So therefore, security, security, security. And then attending to the humanitarian needs. Then turn in our direction to the good governance that we spend a lot of time discussing and so forth, in building these institutions and all. And some of these services, by the way, is a luxury to the current reality that exists on the ground. Just to give you an idea, Professor Samatar talked about 80% of these young that are unemployed. Perfect. You're right. In essence, those are supposed to be part of the priority. But I'm not sure if that ought to be number one or number two. For a government that operates on $1.5 million, $1.5 million for the 3 months that the high tides of the ocean, they don't get a lot of traffic, I guess, through the sea to collect a lot of money. In good times, they get $2 million. None of the international community gives the government directly any money to operate and to establish the jobs that's needed, to create industries, or encourage the private sector to flourish and all of this is a luxury that we can talk about in theory, but in practice, nothing. Now, what caused that? That's a different story. Of course, that goes back to the issue of corruption that the professor talked about, and so forth and so on. But what's the troubling part is the narrative that doesn't change. The situation changes on the ground, but the narrative is fixated. These guys are corrupted. These guys are corrupted. Yes, they were corrupted, and they are still corrupted, but they are now less chronically corrupted, if you will. But can we deal with that and improve that situation to make them perfect gradually? Or should we just keep the narrative as it was, regardless of all of these changes that are happening? The government is now providing services. This is not true for the last 20 years. None of them did provide that. For example, the military is getting paid. All the security apparatus is getting paid, right, on time. They get, in addition to that, when the government that was led by Prime Minister Farmajo that the professor mentioned when they came, that the army was not being paid. Now it gets paid consistently. The monies that were intended for the army were going into some people's pockets, basically. They get, in addition to the $100 a month that they get paid for, $60 for food ration, okay? And then they went to the veterans who were neglected in Hospital Martin. Hospital Martin is rebuilt, and this is veterans hospital, if you will, okay? It's remodeled and all of that, and now they receive money, payments, something that they were not getting. And again, the injured soldiers, both the U.S. and Italy pays for the active members of the army. Okay, they pay them $100 a month. AMISOM soldiers get $1,000 a month, plus their expenses, $2,300 a month, and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, once they're not active, the money stops as far as the U.S. and Italy is concerned. Now, the government, out of the $1.5 million, that's not billion, that they have to run the country, okay, and still pay not only these 550 ministers, but also operating the city, the Banadr region and so forth and so on. All of that comes from their $1.5 million. And this is the corruption that we are talking about. But when you put it in real terms, then you will understand this is a story, diversionary story, that the IC group, that real and the real network mafia that's in Nairobi had really concocted, basically, which is really the successful idea now everybody repeat it without scrutinizing it, without examining it, without putting it to test. And this is the reality. I apologize for taking the time.
My name is Jibril. This is priceless. The two most, talk about elite, two most respected Somali academics. Can we give them a hand? My question is, you talked about involving the youth, investing in them. You can talk to us a little bit more about that, Professor Ahmed. You talked about you've given some list, 1, 2, 3, 4, to the president. Can you talk about that?
Please, I just finished.
And I'm mindful of the students, particularly, to have time to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I think we can add maybe a few minutes at the end if you are not rushing.
Yes.
So
Can do that.
if you have time, we can. If the students have questions, I think can accommodate that. Quickly, before I get to the question, and I won't go too long, but I want to make just a quick comment. Look, there's no question that the international environment, by and large, unless you are in the oil-producing Middle Eastern countries, is tight for money. I mean, we were just watching last night what's happening in Europe. So we understand that. But there is enough still in the international community, particularly in the Western world, developed Western world, enough cash still available for those communities that know how to win them over. How to win them over. The 1.5 that the Somali transitional federal government has is partly as a so meager, partly as a result because they don't know how to cultivate the international system. I can give you chapter and verse on this. So that's one. Second thing, I would suggest to the international community, if I was advising them today, I would suggest this. Whatever gifts that you are giving to the Somali people, in terms of reconstructing institutions, not the famine, no conditions. You just give, as long as you deliver it to the people who need it. But if it is about reconstructing the country, I would urge the international community not to give it to the transitional federal government, but to give it to those areas which have now shown some evidence that they can rebuild. And Somaliland is one of those places. Give it to those places. Not necessarily to recognize their independence, but to give them so that they can deepen that success and it becomes therefore a model for how to do the rest. But to get back to the encounter with the Sharif, the president, I've written about this, by the way, so I can give you the citation later. But here are some points we suggest. Not interested in being part of that, but someone who is old enough now and studied enough to say, well, look, here are some thoughts that you might want to try. Okay? Number one, we suggested to him that the first order of business for you should be to build an autonomous, independent, we will even help you find the money to finance this, autonomous, independent national commission to undertake the project of reconciliation that you eloquently spoke about, to rebuild this. Other countries have done that. They have done that in Rwanda, they have done that in South Africa, and they have done in other parts of the world. An independent, significant, highly respected Somali elders, intellectuals, religious leaders, whatever the group are, to now map the strategy of dealing with the issue of reconciliation and dealing with the issue of justice, among other things. That was one of them. It hasn't happened, as far as I know. 2, suggested to him that you rebuild the international invoice. I think you might have even written something about it lately. I mean, one of the most bankrupt places where you can judge the transitional federal government to this day, just look at the caliber, with the exception maybe here, the caliber of the embassies that the Somali have. It is really, really embarrassing. Al-Shabaab is not pushing them out of Rome or London or Washington, D.C. or the United Nations or whatever, Nairobi. Rebuild those. And we gave them some criteria of how to rebuild this, both in terms of where you want to put this and the people who are going to man this and how to finance this. We have suggested that. Blueprint. Test it. Nothing has happened. What you have is the old, same Somali formula. This is my cousin's cousin, my sister's in-law. Can I have a job for him or her in this embassy? That's the same old formula. So that's another example. The final example, item we suggested, there were, I think, 4 or 5 of them. We suggested that the issue of Somaliland is extremely critical. And the distance is growing by the year. The distance. We need to think about a strategy of how to pull them back. And that's not going to be through some force or some other pressure. It has to be through rebuilding civic identity with them, even if some of their elite are somewhat so far away. But the community, and there are certain things that we could do as unionists. And we named some things that could be done. For example, whatever little aid you get, allocate some of that for Somaliland. And not just to give to Hargeisa people, no, but rebuilding institutions, water systems, schools, hospitals, whatever it is, so that they know the transitional federal government that has the Somali flag with it in Mogadishu not only represents Mogadishu and its environment, that's what it does now really, but that it represents the Somali people, even if it doesn't have the capacity to reach everybody. Gestures make a great deal of difference in politics.
And I'll just go on record saying I agree with the professor on all 3. Yeah, and it's been in existence the last 3 years. The purpose is just to cultivate leaders that would take over, in that catastrophic situation that the professor described earlier, and become the leaders that will save the country. And the way we do it is, the vision behind it is really to challenge them intellectually from so many different directions. People that they agree with and people that they disagree with. Bring in points of view openly, from religious to the most secular points of view. And allow them to process that information and learn from, because even the Islamic tradition, and the Prophet says, for example, al-hikmatu dhalat al-mu'min. Yani the wisdom is the lost she-camel of the believer. So take it wherever you find it, it's yours. In other words, atheist, whoever, you find the wisdom, take that wisdom, it's yours. Take an ownership of it, apply it, and so forth and so on. So you bring in those kind of people with the hope that you will cultivate leaders that their horizon is much broader than the current leadership that we have. And again, I'm talking about every sector of the society, including the diaspora. The diaspora, as I said earlier, became detached, and it's not really functioning as a community anymore. Right.
Can I just add one more item in terms of the recommendations, because this is a college, and I think it might be important to you also. And I find this to be absolutely indispensable. We suggested the creation of a national research council. Yeah? Pick up the best Somalis inside and outside of the country in different disciplines, in different focus, but a center of gravity where new ideas that are operable. Yeah? that can be created so that the great questions will be identified and then some papers will be written which will become public policy for the new state in reconstruction, the creation of a national research council. That's independent and autonomous, and we will even find out the money and see if we can find the money from outside the world. It doesn't have to come from the Somali people. So that was one of the other recommendations.
Does the TFG have to be the only catalyst for growing societal approval turbulence, or can Somaliland be the model for it, and then reconcile with the TFG and say, hey, now the TFG can shore up the funds, and then be that avenue, or can it be through the TFG right out, or can it just have to be through all?
Good question. Very good question. Well, Somaliland has responsibilities. The people of Somaliland have responsibilities for the rest of the Somali people. And I have argued vociferously with them, that you have to meet your own obligations too, to the rest of the Somali people. If you are better off, all the more reason why you have to do something. Okay? The problem with Somaliland, though, is that it is ruling elite. Yeah? It is ruling, which grew out of the SNM, the so-called Somali National Movement. It still seems to be bent on the project of secession. And the circumstances in the southern part of the country, the old Italian Somaliland, particularly deep south, are so unattractive to people that they say to you, what do you want us to do? Go back to that? We're not going to be part of that anymore. So the problem, therefore, with the North is that the ruling elite are now focused and have been focused on this project of secession. Okay? And to make them understand the importance of they becoming responsible for the rekindling of collective civic life is a tall order. But it can happen at the grassroots level. It can happen at the grassroots level. And there are many communities in Somaliland, East and West and Central, that are extremely sympathetic to the cause of the national reconstruction. They just don't know where to go and who to connect to. Who do they connect to, you see? That's why, at least from my point of view, I became part of a group of Somalis, inside and outside of the country, that creates a political party. You can go into the web and find it out. It's called Hil Qaran, and part of the reason is to exactly do that. And there are people from the north who are members of this. I am from the north. I'm a member of this, and there are people from the communities from the south. The other source of this rebuilding of the civic idea, I think, and the civic heart, is also not just the TFG. I mean, that's an important fulcrum. Yeah? Yeah. I mean, the state is a great propagandist, good or bad. But then it can happen in mosques, it can happen among the youth, it can happen in so many different other places. The challenge for the Somali people, both whoever is at the governing level and the rest of the society, students in colleges and universities outside of Somalia. There are colleges and universities inside Somalia. It can happen in so many different places. But without successfully rekindling the sense of civic collective identity, I think the whole historical project really is a dead end.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the time to ask a question. First, I want to answer your question because you posed the question to all of us, and when I say you, I mean Professor Samatar. I think you asked the question, can Somalia survive political death?
The land will be there. Can Somali people survive their own political death?
Well, Somali people as individuals, as living organisms called human beings, I think they will continue to exist. But as a nation...
Not necessarily. There are people who have disappeared in the face of history.
But as a nation, I think nature hates vacuum. Without a state, the Somali nation cannot survive as a nation.
Right.
Others will move in, because if there is no, if it's a vacuum, if there is no air there, there will be air from outside that comes in. So that will be the situation. There are two things that stick to my mind from the presentations that you both made, and they were very brilliant, both of them. One is the analogy of the patient that Abu Bakr Arman gave, and the other one is the one that was really extremely interesting and it really hit me. You talked about the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. And here I see the two of you, Abu Bakr Arman is a manifestation of the optimism of the will, and you are a manifestation by and large of the pessimism of the intellect. You are not without the will. You have shown that you are not without the will. And Abu Bakr Arman has shown us that he is not without intellect. Now, I'm going to, finally I come to my question. I'm going to ask you a question. My question is, I'm not a political scientist, nor am I a sociologist. So please, if I'm a little limited in the way I'm addressing this question, posing this question, forgive me. My field is physics. I'm a physicist. We deal with equations. On one side of the equations, we have sources of energy or forces, what we call forces. And then those forces interact, and on the other side, we have the result. Okay. In a very short way, looking at Somalia, looking at the situation, and we have both analyzed the situation brilliantly. What are the forces you see? Okay, that are the hope for the Somali people. The forces that are the ingredients for a better future for the Somali people. Thank you very much. For both of you.
And well, for me, it's two. One I mentioned already is the youth, and in the future, and Asiya being one of them. Mahmoud Galdon is Asiya's father, by the way. I'm going to put him on the spot. Yeah, and so one is the youth, definitely. It really gives us a sense of hope. The other one is, of course, anything that would defeat the 4.5, which would be in one way would be establishment of the political parties and so forth and so on. And initially, of course, it will be similar to what we seen in the 60s. It might be, to a certain degree, exclusive club of some sort, whether it is clan-based or whether it is, in general sense. I'm not talking about Hilqaran now. Let's go beyond that. Yeah. And so it could be me and my uncle and my cousin party, ex-party, or whatever name we give. But ultimately, though, these parties would certainly replace the 4.5 issue, which is really institutionalized clanism, in my opinion, that should be done without. So these are the two things that keep me encouraged. And
let me respond with a physics formulation first, and that is the second law of thermodynamics. On one side, the exhaustion of energy and the secretion of energy. We have a concept for this in physics called entropy. Entropy is acute in Somali society now, not just only in the physical sense, but in the cultural sense too. In fact, I have argued in other places, to the dismay of some Somalis, that the Somali people, potentially yes, but now they have no assets. They have no economic assets, potentially perhaps, no economic assets, no political assets, no intellectual assets, cultural assets, yeah, and even environmental assets, okay? So there's a great deal of secretion of energy, in that sense, destruction, that's the entropy. So the counter thrust to that, then in physics, will be counter entropy, yeah? Something that will renew the energy in its broad sense of culture and economy and all that. Who would be the counter entropic forces? That's what you are asking us. I would agree. I would not just say the youth. There is nothing magical about being young. Okay? Yeah. I was young too. So it is just it's the movement of time in its most primitive sense. So I don't want to overload youth because the destructive people some now are youth too. Al-Shabaab is heavily youth movement or youth organization. I'm talking about child soldiers. I think the youth have the promise of the future, yes. And investing in them, therefore, as you have done, and I think I have done, and others have done, is a very important way of trying to reclaim the future and shape the future. So that's one. Second, but a particular kind of a youth, not just youth because they are young. It's just foolishness otherwise. Second, I think, women. Women. But they too would have to reconstruct. It's not just that they are females, it is that they occupy a particular location in the social structure, which has been under tremendous pressure in terms of cost of the entropy. And it is in their material, personal interest for them to see the transformation of these structures of oppression and deprivation. I mean, the people are dying, young people, children, and women in these refugee camps. So that's another, women, but reconstructing women themselves, and they reconstructing themselves. And then finally, two other places. I think cosmopolitan Islamic scholars, not just any bloody sheikh, no. Yeah? Because many of them are shallow, and they hoodwink people by frightening them through all kinds of mythologies. But well-grounded, thoughtful Islamic thinkers and scholars. And I see my friend as an example of that. Okay? They can help the rebuilding of this energy in a way that is sophisticated and therefore important. My final group would be, and this we might disagree a little bit, part of the reason why the Somali people are trapped. They have no intellectual capital. We have no intellectual capital. If we had time, I can tell you story after story of trying to create an academic journal for the first time, academic journal in Somali studies, and the difficulty of getting people just to write. We will get the money, everything, just write. The difficulty, no intellectual capital. So the educated Somalis need to graduate to become serious intellectuals. Intellectual meaning producing ideas that are transformative. That will be the other group.
Yeah, I think I respect two of you, and your performance is really great. I studied political science, and I take example the patient you described, and Somali is still in hospital, and the patient need a lot of doctors. We have seen Ethiopia, we test Egyptian, we tested Djibouti. Now we have doctors from Kenya and Uganda. And I don't think so they're not going to succeed. And we tested the biggest doctor in the world was you in 1993. So what do you think the best doctor can solve this patient who have a heart problem and have diabetes?
Very good question.
Can I have another question while you guys, because time is running?
Sure.
You guys have done very well articulating exactly Somali history and what we have now today. I'm deep understand that it's very hard to bring back Somalia. Now, Somalia becomes the global problem. Pirates, terrorist issues, and it truly is a regional problem. Regions, the states that surround Somalia. As a citizen of the world, I'm worried about the impact of this Somalia. Is it right if we think, people like you guys, think that we dissolve the state of Somalia? Is that too extreme? Is it too early to think about that? What we see now, we see the Ethiopian coming in Somalia, boarding them, own security. We see the Kenyans coming. We experience Somaliland say, okay, enough is enough, we're going our own state, probably join Ethiopia or maybe Djibouti. Any suggestion in that area?
Well, I'll answer the first question first. Going back to the patient, which one would be the best doctor to? Well, the doctor has to have a vested interest in saving the patient. If he's not morally sworn doctor or indigenous doctor, or, someone who has the vested interest to save the patient, then it's an either exercising futility at best, or even worse. So it has to come from us. So the doctor has to be somebody who can really stand for that nation and and not really get distracted by the little things. And I'm not minimizing the other negative things, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying some are more serious than the others. And part of the strategic thinking is to know which one is first, and really put them in that order. Not number 50 does not have to be number 1. So we have a lot of problems, and if we sat here, we can discuss it till God knows when. But we just need to focus on these. Earlier I mentioned the security aspect. Okay? And is it done deal? No, it isn't. Still, we're struggling with that. Now, if a group of people can either come up and write a paper as to how to improve the security, and not really wait for a quick meeting that's held in one of these capital cities, to come up with an already prepared plan for security. It has to come from us. And no one is discussing that because everybody is busy on the minute things, that who is there, who's being replaced by whom, and so forth and so on. So that's, to me, the second, or should I? No, go ahead.
Okay, please.
Okay. The second one, which is, should we just forget about this thing and let it go and dissolve the whole nation? I mean, become another Kurdistan or something, just join others or become a little fiefdom, or perhaps the American Indians or so, open a little casino and Bantustans or whatever. Should we become that? And well, our area still attracts the world attention, believe it or not. And it's not because we are a country that had a civil war that the world has attention. It's not because we're just a threat to the. That's part of it, but that's not the whole reason. There are a lot of parts of the world that are really threatening their neighbors and so forth and so on. And I was given 1 minute. So I don't think that dissolving is something that we should entertain.
Let me just add 2 things quickly. One, I would agree. In one sentence, the best doctor, I agree with Arman that if it is not indigenous, and it doesn't come from the society itself, artificial insemination is not easy. So that's one. What I will couple with that, though, would be collaboration between seriously capable, competent, legitimate internal doctor leadership, coupled with international solidaristic groups, governments and others, who really are also deeply humane and they want to participate in the revival of a society that had it so bad. That combination, I think, will be important. But it is the indigenous doctor that has to know how to choose from the many others in the international arena who want to get involved. We don't have that now. I don't have that intelligence. We don't have that calculative capacity. So that's where I would leave, but I agree with you.
And I agree with that point. I would just not go by the institution of international community as it exists now. But having countries that can assist with that.
If we have leadership that understands the world, then we can shop and find out where are the friends, where are the people who have deep solidarity and who can participate in rebuilding. Your question, I agree with you. We might have that fate. That might be what history has written for us. But I still think that the Somali people have options that did not drive us towards Bantustanization or the dismemberment. I just don't want to accept that defeat. It's a total defeat.
Absolutely.
Okay? So my argument would be, in order to forestall the happening of that, which could be, we have to rethink in terms of what the great questions are and who are the men and women in not individual, but teams who can take us to the other road rather than to this one. And I think that's where the challenge is now, and 2012 would be very critical in that. If we have, we might disagree on this, if we have a repeat or a return of Sharif and company in 2012, the same thing we have now comes back, I think the disaster will compound, in my opinion. They are inapt and they are illegitimate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great.
All in good taste.
Yes, really.
My question is, I don't want to come off as being, unfeeling in this humanitarian crisis that's going on, but I think at one point, do we say, let's not focus so much on humanitarian aid and relief and focus more on infrastructure development, because I feel like that's the long-term solution to this humanitarian crisis that we have. Because I haven't seen much talk coming from the Somali government about, how can we create a global institution, opposed to hearing a lot about we need more aid and more help, which is understandable, I think, because in every situation we do, but that's
Yeah. Well, currently, the way it's structured, by the way, and there is a reason for that, but let me just tell you what are the facts. All of these monies that are appropriated for Somalia, for whatever reason, the ones that are earmarked for political development, or development in general, let me just say, is primarily goes to Somaliland and Puntland, in very small amount, if any, with the recently with in Gobolka Banaadir, the region of Banaadir started receiving some aspect, nothing else. Okay, and there is a reason for that, because the people in that area who are still saying we have a flag, we have an entity called Somalia that's recognized by the UN and so forth, are to be pressured to be called South Central Somalia. Once they accept that, the process of Bantustan is done with. They will have their own flag. They will have someone who is equally claiming to be president and so forth and so on. And that's what the resistance is all about. With all its dysfunctionalities, I'm not going to justify and pretend like everything is good in the South. It isn't. There are some things that I myself am critical of. But one thing that's good is the only area where that notion of keeping Somalia as it is, through negotiation, not through force, give the credit where the credit is due. The current government and the ones before them did not send an army to the north and force the secessionist elite, for example, and bring them into. They didn't do that. And there isn't any discussion of that. Is that a good thing? Yes, of course it is. And we should commend them for that, because that discussion never took place. Okay? But also, by the same token, there hasn't been any negotiation, as Professor Samatar said. No one is discussing can we bring them in a very peaceful way and really discuss and address some of these grievances. The good thing that happened, however, again, one of those fingers that's moving in the comatose patient, is when President Sharif on the 26th of June addressed for the first time since 1988 on the issue of what happened to the people of today's Somaliland, okay, and acknowledged that there has been some wrongs that were done, and said that it's time that we address these issues. But again, action has to follow that. So that's a good step, and they responded positively, but we have to build on that. We cannot just symbolically throw a few words here and there and expect things to change. It's not going to change.
I'll just add two sentences, and that is humanitarian aid. I mean, genuine humanitarian aid, and that concept of humanitarianism itself and the actions that go with it have to be disaggregated to figure out which one is genuine and which are not. But genuine humanitarian aid, particularly in a time of heightened famine, is the first priority, period. Okay?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you are right, you have to connect that to the long term. Otherwise, what happens is that you just wait to react to whatever calamity happens in any given year or two. So you got to hook the two together. But the priority goes to feeding and medical care and trying to salvage people who are on the verge of dying. But the rebuilding is what will, in the end, inoculate you from the devastation of droughts and famine. You got to do the two together. So we are back to leadership that is competent and that's legitimate and has vision and knows what is needed now and what is needed tomorrow and the year after and the year after. Thank you very much.
We-